He left his home country with nothing but a suitcase and a promise. For 3 years he cleaned floors abroad just to give his wife a better life, but while he was scrubbing toilets in a foreign land, she was standing in a wedding dress, marrying someone else. This is the story of a man who gave everything and lost it all without even knowing. If you believe in loyalty, sacrifice, and the truth always finding its way out, hit subscribe now. Stay until the end because this story will break your heart. Daniel was not a man who dreamed big. He never wanted fame, fortune, or a life full of luxury. All he wanted was a small house, a stable job, and a family that loved him. He grew up in a modest neighborhood where money was always tight, and he learned early that nothing in life comes free. His father worked as a mechanic, his mother sold vegetables at a local market, and Daniel grew up watching them struggle quietly, never complaining, just working harder every single day. When he met Amara, something in his life finally felt complete. She was warm, funny, and had a way of making him feel like the most important man in the room. They met at a friend's gathering, and within a few months, they knew they wanted to spend their lives together. Their wedding was simple, filled with laughter, borrowed chairs, and a cake his mother baked herself. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and for a while that felt like enough. For the first 2 years of their marriage, life moved along in a comfortable rhythm. Daniel worked in a small shop, Amara helped at a tailoring business nearby, and together they built a modest but happy home. But happiness alone doesn't pay bills. As their family began to grow with the arrival of their first child, the financial pressure grew heavier. Daniel started picking up extra shifts, working nights and weekends, but no matter how hard he tried, the money never seemed to stretch far enough. It was Amara's older cousin who first mentioned the opportunity abroad. A cleaning company overseas was hiring workers, offering a salary that seemed almost unbelievable compared to what Daniel earned at home. The idea of leaving his family terrified him, but the idea of watching his child grow up in poverty terrified him even more. After many sleepless nights and long conversations with Amara, they decided it was worth the sacrifice. Just 2 years, they told themselves, 2 years abroad, and then he would come home and they would finally build the life they always dreamed of. The night before he left, neither of them slept much. They lay in bed talking about the future, about the house they would build, about the school they would send their child to. Amara promised to wait for him, to take care of their home, and to send him pictures every single day so he wouldn't miss a moment. Daniel promised to work hard, save every penny, and come back to her a better man with a better life waiting for them. At the airport, Amara held on to him like she was afraid the ground might swallow him whole. Their child cried in her arms, sensing something the toddler couldn't yet understand. Daniel kissed his wife's forehead, wiped his own tears quickly so she wouldn't see, and walked toward the departure gate without looking back, because he knew if he looked back, he wouldn't have the strength to leave at all. The country he arrived in was nothing like he imagined. The buildings were taller, the streets were cleaner, but the loneliness was heavier than anything he had ever felt. He was placed in a small shared apartment with 4 other workers from different countries, men who barely spoke his language but understood his exhaustion perfectly. His job began the very next day, cleaning offices from midnight until early morning, scrubbing floors that other people would walk across without a second thought. The work was hard, humiliating at times, and physically exhausting. Some employers treated him with basic decency, while others looked right through him as if he wasn't even human. He would spend hours cleaning bathrooms, wiping down desks, and mopping hallways, all while thinking of his wife and child sleeping peacefully back home. Every ache in his back, every blister on his hands, he told himself, was worth it because it meant a better future for his family. At first, the calls home were frequent and full of warmth. Amara would send pictures of their child taking new steps, learning new words, growing a little more every single day. Daniel would call during his short breaks, sitting on the cold floor of a supply closet just to hear her voice for a few precious minutes. Those calls were the only thing that made the loneliness bearable, the only reminder that somewhere far away he still had a family waiting for him. But slowly, almost too slowly to notice, the calls began to change. Amara started taking longer to answer his messages. Sometimes a full day would pass before she replied, and when she did, her responses felt shorter, less detailed, less like the woman who used to write him paragraphs about their child's day. Daniel told himself it was nothing. She was busy, exhausted from raising their child alone, juggling responsibilities that used to be shared between two people. He convinced himself that distance simply made things harder, not different. Back home, life had indeed become difficult for Amara, but not in the way Daniel imagined. Raising a child alone while managing the household left her feeling isolated and unseen. She loved her husband deeply, but love from thousands of miles away began to feel less like comfort and more like a constant ache. The excitement of receiving his calls slowly turned into a routine, then into an obligation, and eventually into something she quietly began to dread. It was during this time that Victor entered her life. He was a neighbor who had recently moved into the area, kind, attentive, and always willing to help whenever she needed something fixed around the house or someone to talk to. At first, their interactions were purely practical, a borrowed tool here, a friendly conversation there. But little by little, those small moments began to fill a space in her heart that had been empty for far too long. Victor listened to her in a way that made her feel heard again. He noticed the small things, the tired look in her eyes after a long day, the way she lit up when she talked about her child, the loneliness she tried so hard to hide behind a brave smile. He never rushed her, never pressured her, he simply showed up consistently. And consistency was something she desperately craved during a season when her husband felt more like a distant memory than a present partner. Weeks turned into months, and Amara found herself looking forward to Victor's visits more than she looked forward to Daniel's phone calls. She told herself it was harmless, that she was simply lonely and needed companionship, that nothing was truly wrong with leaning on a friend during a difficult time. But deep inside, she knew the feelings growing between them were shifting into something far more complicated than friendship. Meanwhile, Daniel's world abroad had settled into a painful but predictable routine. Wake up, work, sleep, repeat, with occasional phone calls sprinkled in between to remind himself why he was enduring it all. He noticed the emotional distance in Amara's voice but attributed it to exhaustion and stress. He had no reason to suspect betrayal because betrayal wasn't something he had ever considered possible from the woman he trusted with his entire heart. His co-workers, some of whom had faced similar situations with their own spouses back home, occasionally warned him gently about the dangers of long-distance marriages. They spoke from painful experience, sharing stories of partners who had grown distant, who had found comfort in someone else's arms while their husbands worked abroad for a better future. Daniel would laugh off these warnings, confident that his marriage was different, that his love for Amara and hers for him was strong enough to survive any distance. But love, no matter how strong, cannot survive on silence and assumption alone. As Amara's relationship with Victor deepened emotionally, the guilt she felt began to twist into something dangerous, a justification that slowly excused her actions. She told herself that Daniel had chosen to leave, that he had chosen work over family, conveniently forgetting that his choice had been made entirely for her and their child's future. This justification became her shield, protecting her from confronting the truth of what she was doing. It didn't take long before emotional closeness turned into something physical. The affair, once it began, brought with it a strange mixture of guilt and relief for Amara. Guilt because she knew she was betraying a man who trusted her completely, and relief because for the first time in months, she didn't feel alone anymore. Victor made promises about the future, about building a life together, about giving her the attention and presence that distance had stolen from her marriage. As their relationship deepened, Victor began pressuring Amara to make their bond official, to stop living in secrecy and start building an actual future together. He argued that Daniel might never return, that working abroad often turned into years instead of months, and that she deserved happiness now rather than waiting indefinitely for a man who had essentially abandoned her for a paycheck. His words, though manipulative, found fertile ground in her already conflicted heart. The decision to marry Victor secretly wasn't made overnight. It came after months of internal conflict, sleepless nights, and desperate attempts to convince herself that she deserved this new chapter of happiness. She reasoned that Daniel was building his own new life abroad, perhaps even forgetting about her the same way she was forgetting about him. This assumption, entirely untrue, became the final push she needed to move forward with a decision that would soon shatter two families completely. The wedding was small, quiet, and deliberately hidden from anyone who might report back to Daniel. Only a few trusted friends attended, sworn to secrecy, understanding the delicate nature of what was happening. Amara wore a simple dress, smiled for a handful of photographs, and signed documents that legally bound her to a man who wasn't her husband, while her actual husband continued sending money home every single month, believing he was providing for a family that still needed him. Back abroad, Daniel had no idea his entire world had quietly collapsed. He continued working double shifts, skipping meals to save extra money, dreaming about the day he would finally return home to surprise his family with the savings he had accumulated. He imagined Amara's face when he told her they finally had enough money to build the house they always talked about. He imagined his child running into his arms after years of only knowing him through a phone screen. The first crack in his reality appeared through a distant cousin who had recently visited his hometown. During a casual phone call meant simply to catch up, the cousin mentioned offhandedly that Amara seemed to be spending an unusual amount of time with a neighbor, someone the cousin had never seen before but noticed frequently around the house. Daniel brushed it off initially, assuming it was simple neighborly friendliness, nothing worth losing sleep over. But the comment lingered in his mind longer than he expected. Small doubts began creeping in during quiet moments during his walks home from work during the silence of his shared apartment at night. He started paying closer attention to Amara's behavior during their calls, noticing things he had previously overlooked, the way she would sometimes seem distracted, the way she avoided certain questions about her daily routine, the way her voice would occasionally carry a tone he couldn't quite place. Determined to uncover the truth, Daniel reached out to another relative, someone he trusted completely, and asked them directly if anything unusual was happening back home. The relative hesitated at first, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation, but eventually admitted that rumors had been circulating about Amara and a man in the neighborhood. The relative didn't have concrete proof, only whispers and suspicions, but it was enough to send Daniel into a spiral of anxiety and sleepless nights. He began investigating more seriously, asking questions to different family members, searching for any piece of information that could confirm or deny what he was hearing. It was through a childhood friend, someone who still lived close to his old neighborhood, that Daniel finally received the devastating confirmation he had been dreading. His friend sent him a photograph, one that had been circulating quietly among neighbors, showing Amara standing beside Victor in wedding attire, smiling in front of a small group of witnesses. The moment Daniel saw that photograph, something inside him broke in a way he had never experienced before. He stared at his phone screen for what felt like hours, unable to process what his eyes were seeing. The woman in that photograph was his wife, the mother of his child, the person he had sacrificed everything for, standing beside another man as though their entire marriage had simply never existed. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was legal, permanent, and utterly humiliating. He didn't cry immediately. Instead, he sat frozen in silence, replaying every phone call, every distant response, every excuse he had accepted without question over the past year. Pieces of the puzzle he had refused to see suddenly clicked into place with painful clarity. The shortened calls, the vague answers, the sudden reluctance to video chat as often as before, everything now made devastating sense. When the tears finally came, they came violently, uncontrollably, the kind of crying that comes from a place deeper than sadness, a place of complete disbelief and shattered trust. His roommates, hearing his distress through the thin apartment walls, came to check on him, finding him curled on the floor with his phone still clutched tightly in his hand. They didn't need to ask what happened, they had seen this same heartbreak play out in other men's lives before. For days, Daniel struggled to function normally. He went to work because he had no other choice, but his mind remained trapped in a fog of confusion and grief. He kept asking himself the same painful questions over and over. Had she ever truly loved him? Was their entire marriage a lie? What had he done wrong to deserve such a betrayal after everything he had sacrificed for their family's future? Eventually, after the initial shock began to settle into a quieter, more focused anger, Daniel made the decision to confront the situation directly rather than allowing rumors and second-hand information to control his emotions any further. He requested emergency leave from his job, explaining the family crisis he was facing, and after some difficulty, his employer reluctantly agreed to let him return home for a short period to address the situation. The flight home felt endless, each hour stretching painfully as his mind raced through countless scenarios of how the confrontation might unfold. He thought about his child, wondering how this situation would affect their innocent life. He thought about the years of sacrifice, the loneliness, the physical exhaustion, all of it suddenly feeling meaningless in the face of this betrayal. By the time the plane landed, Daniel felt like a completely different man than the one who had left 3 years earlier. He didn't announce his arrival. Instead, he made his way home quietly, wanting to see the truth with his own eyes before any conversation could happen. When he arrived at his own house, the sight that greeted him confirmed everything he had feared. Victor's belongings were visible inside, personal items scattered around as though he had fully moved into the life Daniel had built and left behind for the sake of his family's future. The confrontation that followed was raw, emotional, and impossible to prepare for despite all his mental rehearsal during the flight home. Amara's face went pale the moment she saw him standing in the doorway, the shock evident in her wide eyes and trembling hands. For a long, tense moment, nobody spoke, the weight of unspoken truths hanging heavily in the air between them. When words finally came, they came in a flood of emotion from both sides. Amara attempted to explain her loneliness, her feelings of abandonment, the emotional neglect she felt during his years away, but her explanations felt hollow against the backdrop of what she had actually done. Daniel listened, his heart breaking further with every word, unable to reconcile the woman standing before him with the wife he had trusted completely. Victor, upon hearing the commotion, appeared briefly, attempting to justify his own involvement by claiming he believed Amara's marriage was essentially over given the years of separation. His justification did nothing to ease the pain in the room. If anything, it deepened the sense of betrayal, revealing how both individuals had convinced themselves their actions were somehow reasonable despite the clear wrongdoing involved. The conversation grew more intense as Daniel demanded answers about the legal marriage, about how she could have made such an irreversible decision without any communication with him whatsoever. Amara broke down completely, admitting through tears that she knew what she was doing was wrong, but that loneliness and manipulation from Victor had clouded her judgment during a vulnerable period in her life. Her admission, while honest, offered little comfort to a man whose entire world had just collapsed. News of the confrontation spread quickly through their small community, as these things often do. Neighbors who had suspected something for months finally spoke openly about what they had witnessed, family members took sides, and the scandal became a topic of conversation throughout the entire neighborhood. Amara faced significant judgment from the community, her actions viewed as a severe betrayal not just of her husband, but of the sacrifices he had made for their family. Daniel, meanwhile, found himself the recipient of an outpouring of sympathy and support from people who understood the depth of his sacrifice and the cruelty of the betrayal he faced in return. Friends and family rallied around him, offering emotional support during what was undoubtedly one of the most painful periods of his life. This support, while comforting, couldn't erase the profound sense of loss and betrayal that now defined his emotional state. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, Daniel faced difficult decisions about his future. Legal complications arose from Amara's secret marriage, requiring him to navigate an already painful situation through formal legal channels. Custody arrangements for their child became a central concern, with Daniel determined to remain a significant presence in his child's life despite the collapse of his marriage. The legal process revealed further painful details about the timeline of Amara's relationship with Victor, details that made the betrayal feel even more calculated than Daniel had initially realized. Documents showed that the emotional and physical relationship had begun far earlier than Amara had admitted during their confrontation, adding another layer of hurt to an already devastating situation. Despite the overwhelming pain, Daniel made a conscious decision not to let this betrayal define the rest of his life. He recognized that dwelling in anger and resentment would only prevent him from moving forward and providing stability for his child. This decision didn't happen overnight. It required significant emotional processing, difficult conversations with trusted family members, and a genuine commitment to healing rather than remaining trapped in bitterness. He eventually returned abroad temporarily to formally end his employment contract and gather his belongings, using this time abroad as an opportunity for reflection away from the immediate chaos of his personal life back home. During this period, he connected with other workers who had faced similar betrayals, finding unexpected solidarity and understanding among people who truly comprehended the unique pain of sacrificing everything only to lose what mattered most. Upon his final return home, Daniel focused entirely on rebuilding his life around his child's well-being and his own emotional recovery. He found stable work locally, choosing to prioritize being physically present for his child's daily life rather than pursuing further opportunities abroad that would require additional sacrifice and separation. This decision, while financially challenging, felt necessary for his emotional healing and his commitment to being a consistent presence in his child's life. Amara's relationship with Victor, built on secrecy and questionable circumstances, faced its own significant challenges once it was no longer hidden from public scrutiny. Without the veil of secrecy, cracks began appearing in their relationship as the reality of their situation, including community judgment and the complicated legal aftermath, placed considerable strain on their union. Whether their relationship would ultimately survive these pressures remained uncertain, but the immediate happiness Victor had promised proved far more complicated than either had anticipated. The story of Daniel and Amara eventually became a cautionary tale within their community, discussed among couples facing similar circumstances of long-distance marriages and financial necessity. Their experience highlighted the profound challenges faced by families separated by economic circumstances, the emotional toll of extended separation, and the devastating consequences that can arise when communication breaks down and loneliness goes unaddressed. For Daniel, the ultimate lesson learned through this painful experience centered on the importance of open communication, even during the most difficult circumstances. He often reflected that had he trusted his instincts earlier, had he addressed the growing distance in their relationship more directly rather than dismissing his concerns, perhaps the outcome could have been different. This reflection, while painful, became an important part of his healing process. He also recognized the importance of maintaining genuine emotional connection despite physical distance, understanding that financial sacrifice alone cannot sustain a marriage without equal investment in emotional intimacy and communication. This realization shaped his approach to future relationships, teaching him to prioritize honest communication and emotional presence over simply providing financial security. As for Amara, her journey through the aftermath of her decisions involved significant personal reflection about the choices that led to such devastating consequences. Whether she found genuine happiness with Victor or came to regret the impulsive decision made during a period of emotional vulnerability, her story serves as a powerful reminder of how loneliness, left unaddressed, can lead individuals toward choices that fundamentally alter multiple lives beyond their own. The true cost of their story extended far beyond the two individuals directly involved. Their child grew up navigating a fractured family structure, and the broader community witnessed firsthand how quickly trust, once broken, becomes nearly impossible to fully repair. Their story stands as a testament to the fragile nature of relationships tested by distance, financial pressure, and the human need for genuine connection and presence. Ultimately, this story reminds us that sacrifice without communication can create dangerous gaps in even the strongest relationships. And that true partnership requires both parties to remain emotionally present regardless of physical distance or financial hardship. Because love that isn't nurtured consistently, no matter how genuine it once was, can quietly wither away while everyone involved remains completely unaware until it's far too late to repair. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and comment your thoughts below.